Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Passage Podcast. My name is John Sandy, and I'm today's host. This podcast aims to pursue the truth, an authentic Catholic life, a deep integration of faith and reason, and a joyful community of families, raising the next generation of the Catholic faithful. Today's guest is Father Shane Deman. Father Deman currently serves as the Vice-Rector for Formation at the Kenrick-Glennon Seminary located in St. Louis, Missouri. Father Deman is a priest of the Diocese of Sioux and received his Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy in 2003 from the University of St. Thomas. Following that, he went on to study in Rome, receiving his STB, STL, and eventually his STD at the Gregorian University in Rome, Italy. He was appointed to the seminary and has been there since 2022. I'm really excited to share the dialogue through this episode whereby Father Deman and I discuss Catholic parenting and what it takes to take care of the first things first, meaning what do we as Catholic parents need to do to make sure we're nurturing our own spiritual life so that we can adequately pass it on to those who we might be raising, and more specifically, our own children. We hope you enjoy our conversation and that it might bless you in some way. Alrighty, I am here with Father Shane Deman on the Catholic Passage Podcast. Father Deman, can you say hello?
Johnny, it's good to be with you. Thanks for the invitation to join you on this epic launch of your podcasting career.
You should feel honored that you get to participate
I do, Your
in the
Honor.
inaugural. Yeah,
I'm honored,
this
Your
is
Honor.
I'm a big deal. I don't know if you've heard how big of a deal I am, but I'm kind of a big deal. And
tell us in humility how big of a deal you are, Your Honor.
That's, you know what, though? Here's the deal. People who are a big deal don't talk about how big of a deal they are. So other than just letting you know I'm a big deal, I don't want to get into the details.
Oh, thanks for your humility. I appreciate your modesty.
For your Father Shane,
yes.
and so the listening audience knows, Father Shane and I go back, decades.
Yes.
We were classmates at St. John Vianney Seminary in college. So at times, I may inadvertently say, Shane. I apologize if I call him Shane without the preface of Father before it. It's not meant as disrespect, but a sign of my familiarity with him. So if that happens, I'm giving a disclaimer up front. I apologize. Father Shane,
yes.
Can you please introduce yourself for our listening audience?
Yes, I have known you going back all the way to the early 2000s when we were at the University of St. Thomas together. I was ordained as a priest of Sioux City in 2008. Served in a couple different parishes, served in different high school ministries, was the vocation director from 2015 until 2022, at which point I came down to St. Louis, Missouri, and I've been serving as the Vice-Rector for Kenrick Seminary, while also still being the Director of Seminarians for Sioux City, and just going to be with you.
Well, so that everyone knows, and by the way, thank you for that, so that everyone knows, this is actually our second time in this exact podcast. So I don't know, maybe it's not the inaugural.
Hope it's better.
Yeah, we ran into some technical difficulties whereby you could only hear me speak and not Father Shane. And so we had to do a redo. This is the redo.
It's going to be even better.
Yeah, I'm not bad with technology, but this is podcasting and then podcasting remotely nonetheless with special fancy microphones is something I am certainly not experienced with. So I appreciate your patience and your generosity in doing this again. I know how crazy busy you are because like you said, you're at the seminary right now at Kenrick, right?
Right. We're in midterms.
Right. And you teach class there, right?
Yes.
And in fact, didn't you administer or proctor an exam last week?
Yes. And I just finished grading them earlier today. The students will get their exams back tomorrow. Well, at least they'll get their grades back. And then we're pressing on with the next lecture, which is not fully ready yet.
We need to slow this down. I have so many questions. All right. So first off, how many classes do you teach?
Just one right now. With my evaluation schedule, that's all I can handle. I'm doing about 16 evaluations of seminarians a week.
on top of like making the place run, right?
Kind of, yeah.
We don't worry, the rector or won't hear this,
Okay.
so speak freely. No one
Okay.
in St. Louis cares about this podcast, so we're good.
Okay.
But okay, so we need to slow things down here. That's what I always tell clients when I was practicing law. We need to slow it down here, okay?
Break
We
it
need to
down.
just
Break it down.
yep. As Father Hughes would say, let's talk about that.
Uh-huh.
Let's talk about that, John. Okay, so you teach one class. It's Mariology.
Yes, that's
That's
it.
a question with a question
It's
mark.
Mariology. It's a whole course on the Blessed Virgin Mary, the dogmatic truths of that, the scriptural foundations, the development of dogma, all of that.
So you know that's Father Neppel's specialty, right?
Yes, he did write on the role of Mary in terms of ecclesiology.
And with, of course, the infallible Hans von Balthasar. I don't know if did I miss out
Hans von Balthasar.
oh, excuse me, Urs,
Yes, there you got it.
Van Balthasar. He's obsessed with him. Have you ever listened to his podcasts?
Yeah, Catholic Stuff You Should Know. I don't tune in all the time, but I've listened in, and he does like von Balthasar. There's no doubt.
Don't defend the podcast, Father Neppel. If you're listening right now, I love you. Number one. Number two. Thank you for the shout out. It got when Bishop Nicholas said, "Hey, I heard you got a shout out." Shout out. I got to admit, I swelled with pride. But that being said, I got to poke fun at you. I don't think there's ever an episode I've ever listened to you where you've not brought that up.
Well, that means he's a good theologian. He sees everything through the lens of a theologian that he's really mastered the thought of.
Father Shane, I'm looking at you right now. And are you looking at a cell phone while you're doing this podcast?
I'm looking up notes for what we're going to be talking about here.
Stop doing that. You can't prepare while we talk. This has to be natural. If I'm going to get a juicy soundbite that's going to get you in trouble, I can't have you prepared.
Okay, Aaron's ready to edit.
Well, we'll see.
Okay.
Okay, so back to Mariology. How many students took this exam?
26.
Do you grade on a curve?
No.
Are they first year, second year, third year students?
They're second year and fourth year combined.
And fourth?
Yes,
So
there's a reason for that with the new PPF 6 things. We're readjusting the curriculum, so it's kind of an odd year.
I don't want you to get into that.
Okay. Not going to slow down there.
Yeah. We don't need to slow down there. Let's not talk about that. But, all right, you don't grade on it. So it's essay exam?
Yes, this was all essays.
Do they write? Is it blue book or do they type?
Old school blue book.
Pencil?
Yeah, well, pens.
Have you ever caught a student at Kenrick cheating?
No.
All right. And how many A's do you give out, or do you not have quotas? I mean, is it like if you thought
information, Your Honor?
Well, no, I'm not asking for names and like student ID numbers. I just want to know if a grade deserves an A, do you give it? And if all 26 or however many wrote just superb papers, do you give all A's?
Yeah, they didn't all get A's. But if everyone's deserving of that, yeah, great.
Guys, that's a ding. Okay. And how many A's did you give out? Would you
I'm not
guess?
saying.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, too bad.
We went there.
Yeah.
Okay. And so did you give out it? Okay, tell me this. Did you give out any?
I'm not telling you the lowest grades. No, we don't give out any Fs. If they're getting Fs at this point, they shouldn't be in seminary. They're in grad school.
Well, St. John Vianney had some Fs.
Yeah, but the margin in grad school changes a little bit. John Vianney wasn't also working on a master's degree, so.
That's true. He just had problems with his Latin.
That's right.
Okay. Well, good. I think I'm off that obsessive compulsive topic, which took up 5 minutes of our listeners' attention.
Okay. Thanks for
but no, I'm seriously.
Hope we've still, held them on the line here.
Whatever. They're in the car. I mean, I was interested in just kind of that structure and kind of how you deal with that. So I want to go back to Kenrick here on a day-by-day basis, right? How much of your time is devoted to academic instruction and preparation versus administration?
I had to do a lot of front loading with academic work. Throughout the summer, I was just kind of prepping the fall semester course, which is fundamental theology. And then as the fall semester continued, I had to start front loading a lot of Mariology work and did a lot of that over Christmas break because there's just not a lot of time in the midst of the semester with all the formation advising that goes on here, evaluation writing and preparing for those evaluation panel discussions, plus all the faculty meetings. So usually I set aside a couple of days a week now just to work on Mariology notes, but a lot of that had to be done before the semester began.
Next question. You said you
I feel
have
like
16...
I'm on trial here.
Well, a little bit.
Okay.
This is just my way of cross-examining you. It's funny. I had drug court last night, and a comment was made that when I lock in with an individual, in particular, somebody who I think may not be completely forthright with me, it's almost like the mood changes and my temperament and cadence of questioning
I can't
changes.
imagine. I can't
Yeah,
imagine.
they know the dog's on the bone. But I guess here's my next line of questioning. You said you had 16 formation meetings to do. Is it something to that effect? Can you repeat that? What did you say you had?
Usually every month I meet with my 16 advisees.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so you said you're prepping for that.
Yes. No,
Okay, so
no,
that's not
no.
like
I have 16 advisees that meet monthly, but that we also do 16 evaluations during the spring semester
yeah.
a week, and that's the whole building of all the grade
Oh,
levels. So
oh,
that's in addition to my advising meetings.
got it. And so these evaluations, are they with the vocations directors?
Some sit in on it. Otherwise, each seminarian goes in front of a three-person panel of formators. We will have already read their self-eval, their peer observations, and the faculty evaluation of them. And then there's another 30-minute discussion, kind of deepening the points that the evaluations raised.
I think this is good though for the listening audience because I want the laity to maybe understand that, like, look, guys are, especially nowadays, you can't fake it till you make it for the most
No,
part.
it's a
I
pretty
mean, you
rigorous
really,
system.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, especially when you're under a microscope residing together with everybody,
Hmm.
I mean, you could certainly hide, but it's a lot tougher. How about that?
Yeah.
I mean, you got to really work hard to kind of fall in between the cracks.
Yeah. Well, and if the seminary is healthy and doing its job, no one should fall through the cracks. Everyone should be accompanied in advance to really help them discover what's God's vocation for them, what's God's calling them or God calling for them. And if we're doing this well, everyone's going to walk out of seminary a healthier and holier man, whether he gets ordained or not.
Well, and this is off topic for the conversation, but I mean, that certainly was my experience. I
Hmm.
mean, I understand minor seminary or college seminary is very different
Hmm.
in a number of different ways from a graduate level seminary program. But I can say from experience that my time at SJV with you and with the formators and spiritual directors has made me a better judge, better father.
Hmm.
Liz, my wife, would probably dispute better husband.
Okay.
But I don't know if she'd attribute that to SJV. I think she just says I could do better in a lot of different
You
areas.
could. You could.
Yeah. Again, humility. I
That's
mean,
right.
like I
So
said,
humble,
it's,
but you're a big deal.
oh, yeah. Yeah. So, all right. The topic.
Yes.
We've rambled
What do we
enough.
got here?
All right. So, I guess if we were to label this podcast, I'd want to label it First Things First.
Okay.
And I mean, as we talked about last week, I don't know why, but I've had this kind of vision in my head for some time. And it's probably because I've been traveling to Disney World with the kids. But the flight attendant comes on and kind of talks about these oxygen masks dropping from above, and that clear instructions are given that you are not to put somebody else's oxygen masks on before you put the mask on yourself.
Hmm.
And the reason's the obvious, right? That in order to help the people sitting around you or next to you, you yourself need to be able to be receiving a sufficient supply of oxygen. And maybe obvious, but I guess that struck a chord with me in thinking about Catholic passage and what Catholic passage is. It resonated with me in the sense that if we're talking about passing on the Catholic faith to our children, to the next generations of faithful Catholics, yet we ourselves as young adults are not nourishing and taking care of our own faith and doing the little things, are we really in a place to be able to help others as best as we can?
Hmm.
And that imagery of putting your own oxygen masks on first and then helping others stuck with me. And more specifically, what types of things are we as young adults supposed to be doing or can be doing to feed oxygen into our faith life, similar to the mask, right? And really, the truth that I think it's really hard, if not inappropriate, to try to pass on the faith if you yourself are not living it out. I mean, kids, I say this all the time when I see them in the courtroom, kids know a fake.
Hmm.
And if mom and dad aren't getting along or there's discord in the family home, kids pick up on that. They're incredibly perceptive and astute that way. And so I just think it's real disingenuous and tough for young Catholics to say, listen, I teach CCD, I do this, I do that, I do this, I do that. We pray every night before bed with the kids and all these other things. That's great. But I think the question becomes, what are you doing within your own interior life to feed and nurture your faith, your Catholic faith, before you do any of that other stuff? And that's just as important, if not a non-starter.
Mm-hmm.
Comments, thoughts.
Yeah,
I want to know.
I think this is a really helpful discussion. I mean, you obviously had the image of hearing the flight attendant say, please secure your own mass before assisting others. What does one have to pour out to others if your bucket isn't full, if you're not being replenished with grace, with spiritual nourishment, with spiritual accompaniment? If that's not happening, you're exactly right. It's not only going to be inappropriate, but probably really impossible to be able to give to others in a life-giving way. And you use the image of kids are able to sniff out a fake person really easily. And it's not even just someone who's faking it, it's also someone who's just being drained. There's just nothing that's being replenished in their own interior life. And you can tell after a while that this is going to become just their own personal activism. It's just going to be humanistic virtue planning of what they can muster up with their own strength and abilities. But if there's not really a sense that this person is actually connected to the divine, they're walking more closely towards the things of heaven in a state of holiness, people pick up on that. And they might not be able to articulate it real clearly, but they just know, this person really isn't just showing me the light of God here. So yeah, you have to secure your own mass first.
Now, our listening audience may not know this, and I don't know what order the podcast will go in, so I don't know how many podcasts will be published before this. Do you know what Catholic Passage is, Father Shane?
Well, you have shared a little bit with me, but why don't you remind our listeners of the whole vision here?
Well, and I think before I do that, not because I'm lazy, but because I think it just does a better job encompassing what Catholic Passage is. And a lot of thought went into the mission statement and specifically the mission statement of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to read the mission statement again. And before this podcast, that mission statement will have already occurred and been read to the audience.
Okay.
But I think it's helpful in our discussion. Here's the mission statement of the Catholic Passage podcast. This podcast aims to pursue the truth and authentic Catholic life. So that I'm going to break as I read, right?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of goes to the transparency and fake it till you make it, or, spotting an imposter that I was talking about. But again, an authentic Catholic life, a deep integration of faith and reason. The reason I think that's important, aside from there being encyclicals written on it, is reason. I think in our culture, it's almost leave out the faith. Let's talk about reason. If you can't prove it in a petri dish, then it's not true. Or that faith and reason don't go together.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be kind of the cultural message. And so this turns it on its head. No, we want to integrate our faith and reason and a joyful community of families raising the next generation of the Catholic faithful. So it does, all those things in terms of engaging with the culture we live in, integrating faith and reason, living an authentic Catholic life. But then it ends with community of families raising the next generation of Catholics. And so, sure, there could be young adults that don't have children.
Mm-hmm.
That's a vocation. I totally understand it. But for most of your practicing active Catholics in Northwest Iowa that are over the age of 33, okay, they have at least one kid.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe they don't, and it doesn't mean Catholic Passage isn't for you if you don't have a family. Absolutely not. But this mission here is, how do we pass on our Catholic faith as young adults to our children and raise children in today's age in the truths, in the faith, and what types of connection within the diocese, within our parishes, can help us do that? Again, the idea of oxygen masks. Well, what's our oxygen? If you go to St. Mary's in Spirit Lake, Iowa, and you go to Mass every week, and you bring your kids every week, but for me at least, it's getting the coloring books out, telling the kids 16 times to shut up, and then maybe pinching my daughter so I can get out of the pew and run and take her.
Stop.
What? Well,
Stop.
I mean, let's, maybe the homily's going a little bit too long, but go to the bathroom. We got to get a drink of water.
Whose needs are being met here, Your Honor?
Well, that's my point though, right? And what am I really doing at Mass? Yes, I'm receiving the Eucharist, of course. But it's tough. It's tough when you got young kids that are constantly, and I'm an enabler, and I probably don't have the model family in terms of what their behavior expectations are, because I'm constantly, shh, don't touch that, or I get out the coloring book. But it's tough for kids to sit there fixated, and they don't even understand the homily. I got a 3, 5, and 7-year-old. Those are my 3 youngest, at least, and then JR's 9. But I mean, they don't understand the homily. And if the homily is 15 minutes, I can't get my kids to sit still for 5. You think they're going to sit still for a 15-minute homily they don't understand a word of? I mean, that's torture for them. So I'm sitting there trying to kind of do my best just to get through the hour without having, the folks behind me that don't have kids with them throw darts at me. I can feel their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I can feel it. And so, all right, great. I did the mass. We went to CCD on Wednesday night. Great. We did that. Is that it? Is that what life's about? Right? What else am I doing? And so part of this is a discussion about how can we talk to, not that I have all the answers, I certainly don't, but how can I communicate with other young men that are 40 to say, have you heard of the Magnificat Lenten Companion? I'm mispronouncing that. Magnificat
Yeah.
Lenten Companion. Did you read the reading for Tuesday, March 12th yesterday? Or what are the little things you're doing as reminders to live a more intentional Catholic life? What are things you can do in my own office? I have a crucifix on my desk. I have sacramentals in the sense that I have things in my office to remind me that, hey, I got to integrate my work life and my faith life, and the two aren't separate. So what are you doing to keep that in the back of your mind? Those are things I want to talk to you about.
So you mentioned a lot of things that are good for people to kind of step forward and show investment in their faith. But as you know, Johnny, like, the faith at the end of the day isn't just something that we're doing. It's not just mere activism, right? There's also going to be a lot of community accompaniment that enables that. So in addition to kind of talking about the spiritual reading, the scripture reading, the personal prayer time, the praise that one is offering to God, in addition to just receiving at Mass, right? I think there has to be a lot of other components that go on to securing your own oxygen mask. So one of the things that we have discussed in the past is, who is accompanying each one of us in our own Christian journey? Is one meeting regularly with a confessor? Is one seeing a spiritual director? Does one belong to a Bible study, maybe a faith sharing group, maybe a Catholic men's group, a Catholic women's group? I think all of us need to be held accountable to somebody, more so than just our buddies at the gym and more so than just coworkers. There has to be a spirit of opportunity to talk about the deep things of life, to talk about, images of prayer, challenges in the spiritual life. And if we're not accompanying others, and someone's not accompanying us, then I think there is severe grounds to actually question, is your oxygen mask on? Or are you just kind of running on kind of low battery juice, trying to do this all on your own?
And not only that, but what role does your spouse play in that?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll be honest, not that I'm TMI or Liz will strangle me after this podcast, but I mean, at the end of the day, you do all you can do just to get through the workday, get the kids to the things they need to get dinner on the table, clean up the table after dinner, get the kids bathed, studies, get that spelling list done. And if you got 4 kids, it's 4 different school things.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, by the way, get them in bed by 8:30-ish. And by the time you run that rat race, by the time you yourself get in bed, it's like, hey, honey, I love you. And, maybe we take 20 minutes. Prayer becomes one of those things where if I add that to my checklist, it's just, geez, it's just one more thing. I almost want to check out mentally.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And prayer is certainly not checking out mentally.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you've been on all day, it's so easy just to say, all right, time to shut off the lights, and we're going to start the exact same routine tomorrow at 5:30, 6 in the morning. And you do that on repeat enough, and all of a sudden you're not taking care of first things first.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really my challenge to the listeners of the podcast, and my challenge to myself. Let's be clear here. My challenge to myself is, what am I tapping into? SJV is doing a lay, the college seminary is doing a lay alum retreat in June. Bishop Christensen's leading it. But that's my way of marking off, 3 days on my calendar to say, I don't care what I have going on.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't like going to confession, particularly in Spirit Lake. No offense, Father Hughes, but sometimes I like being anonymous and going outside the area. But if I find myself going to Sioux Falls or going to Minneapolis, looking at the confession times, if you're out of town, to say, now's the time. Now that I'm out of town, sure would be nice to hit up the sacrament of reconciliation, knowing that I'm going to be out of the area.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Catholic Passage, by the way, Father Feller, has some great ideas, but one of the things he's implementing is, how can we do, he's going to hate me for this, they're not called mini retreats. I think we're calling them recharge. At least that's the placeholder right now.
Mm-hmm.
But how can we as Catholic young couples, young adults in our own homes have this community where we're able to help folks literally recharge, refresh, reoxygenate? How are we doing that? And how can we do that with, in Spirit Lake, or at least within Northwest Iowa, within the diocese, and rely on each other to do that? And that's one of the things that Catholic Passage aims to achieve, is that type of communal approach.
Well, I think that's well said. And you're asking some pretty pointed questions here, because you don't want anyone feeling like they're on an island, and you want them moving with an authentic sense of community. And I really applaud your efforts to any ways that people can be invited to do a little bit of a recharge and hold themselves accountable. We really need it in the spiritual life. Good for you.
Well, and I think the problem, one of the barriers with that, I remember, Father Bear was our rector
Mm-hmm.
at SJV, and he would always tell me, or maybe it was a homily, not me personally, but a homily, I remember, I don't like broccoli.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I'm at the what was the Chinese buffet up the street on Cleveland Walk?
Cleveland Walk, that's right.
Yeah, the Cleveland Walk. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We were learning temperance, obviously.
Sure you
If
are.
I'm at if I'm at the Cleveland Walk, I don't have anything against broccoli, but I'm just not going to take any broccoli from that buffet dish.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to focus on the crab rangoons or whatever else is out, but I'm not going to eat the broccoli.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. That's okay. I think the challenge for this recharge, for these kind of organic growth of, young adults getting together to talk about faith matters, to eat wine and cheese, have a few glasses of wine or Busch Lights, and to share faith and kind of talk about whatever we talk about. Here's the issue. You got to build a rapport. It's not just enough that we're both baptized Catholics or that we both go to the same church. You got to have some connection there. You got to have some trust and some cohesiveness, right? And the challenge, I think, is just to not kind of randomly assign these groups where it's like, hey, everybody, come to the Sandy house tonight. Come one, come all, and all of a sudden it turns into a disaster because no one really wants to open up. No, there's some personality clashes maybe within that dynamic. Not bad, but again, not broccoli, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, it has to fit. And, how do you kind of test that? Thoughts?
Yeah, I just think anyone who's going to be accompanying you, there has to be a well-stabilized relationship where vulnerability can happen. The pastor and the parish staff can't just assign you to a group and you can just automatically assume that there's going to be intimacy and vulnerability there. So I think the greatest sense of vulnerability in spiritual accompaniment comes when there's some sort of an affinity. Do people already feel comfortable with one another, maybe as a couples group? Do people already feel comfortable with one another at the gym and they work out together and they're exercising together? Is there a bowling league, and all of a sudden guys that you're already really comfortable with, you want to take it deeper into other conversations? There has to be some sort of a level of affinity, and the parish staff just can't be enforcing this upon people. And so with that, is this something that I can trust? Is this something that I can take the next step and be vulnerable with? And if so, then there's a great opportunity for spiritual maturity.
Well, and I think it's tougher for guys. I mean, maybe that's a sexist comment for me to make, and I'm going to get sanctioned. I don't know. Gag order is going to come out. It says Sandy can't talk about that anymore. But I do think it's harder for guys.
Mm-hmm.
I think guys have a harder time not talking, certainly not opening up. We'll talk to the cow comes home about, the the restructuring of Patrick Mahomes' deal, and can you believe Kirk Cousins was sent to Atlanta?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But once we start talking about Jesus Christ and how are we as men living in model of Jesus Christ, are we doing a good job with that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't. Look, dude,
Yeah.
you know, it's almost like the wife going, tell me how your day was.
Sure.
And one word answers. It's no different outside the home than it is in.
Sure.
I mean, guys just don't want to talk about certain things like that. Maybe it's because of how we were raised. I don't know. But I think for a lot of guys, it's it's not our go-to.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's easier for women in a lot of ways. I don't know why. Maybe it's a nature thing. I don't know. But in any event, I think it's tough for guys to kind of talk like that with one another. It's rare to have a relationship like that. I have had relationships like that, but they're harder to find, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Men aren't always external processors, and so they're not always ready to speak about everything until they've kind of figured it out on their own. But also, if they don't have a history of being really vulnerable and intimate with men in terms of deep conversation topics, and they've always stayed in the shallows, that does take a bit of a risk to go into some deeper areas. But how is one's faith going to grow with your oxygen mask being really secure if you don't take those risks and have really strong, courageous men who are willing to invite you into that deeper level of relationship? It's really important.
Yeah. I know that when Jacob Welp, he was a classmate of ours that comes back to Okoboji every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, I'm talking layperson, but Jacob, he's in the Archdiocese of Denver right now. Great guy, and his family's great. But Jacob and I, it's amazing when he comes back to visit. It's like we automatically pick up there. And so, yeah, no, that's good. Now, last time I asked this, and I want to ask it again, Father. If there's one challenge, and it doesn't have to be unique to the Diocese of Sioux City, it could be more general. But if there's one challenge or area of growth that in your ministry thus far, your priestly ministry, you said, geez, this is lacking amongst young adults, or this is an area I think we as a church could be doing better. And I don't mean churches in like the institutional hierarchy. I mean, potentially John Sandy as layperson that's 40 in his parish, right? What are things that you think young adults in Northwest Iowa or otherwise could be doing better?
Learn how to pray.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that sounds simple and that might sound drastic. I just think we have thousands and thousands of Catholics wandering around this nation who have really never been taught to pray. They've been taught to kind of follow some rules, and they've been taught to go to Sunday worship, and they've been taught what the sacraments are. But in terms of actually being able to relate things to Jesus and to discern the voice of the Good Shepherd in the intimacy of their own quiet space, that requires spiritual direction. It requires mentoring. But if someone doesn't know how to do that, then they're going to actually feel very isolated from the Lord. And what would our parishes look like if everybody was actually detecting the voice of the Good Shepherd frequently? And that doesn't mean like audible locutions coming through your eardrums, right?
Sure.
But just actually noticing, I can discern the presence of the Holy Spirit working in my life. I can sense when Jesus is opening certain doors. I know when he's calling me to avoid certain sins or calling me to raise the bar in certain areas of my spiritual life. If we had everybody who was really investing in a personal prayer life, what would the church look like? I think that's one of our greatest needs right now.
Yeah, and not to bring everything back to me, but well, I'm going to bring it back to me.
But you're a big deal.
Yeah, I'm a big deal.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about that.
No, of course not.
All right. For me, and certainly this was a struggle even in seminary formation. I could only take about 5 minutes of just, like when I did that silent retreat at Broomtree, I mean, for gosh sakes, I needed to jump off a cliff. And even when we did, what's the lake outside Rome? Lago Albano?
Lago Maggiore?
Yeah,
Lago
where
Bracciano.
where the Pope's castle, summer villa
Castle
is.
Gandolfo.
Yeah, but what's the lake called that it's on? Isn't it Albano?
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah. Well, there's the English college that was there because the Americans were stupid and sold it to the Brits pre-World War II for some reason. Thanks, bishops. And it's beautiful, by the way. But I even remember when Father Corolla took us on a retreat there that was supposedly supposed to be silent. I was silent, I think I read 6 books.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't just be still. I gotta, and maybe that's a personality thing, but I gotta be reading. I gotta be actively engaged with something. But just sitting to hear the voice of Jesus, yeah, you got me for 5 minutes, and then I want to move on.
Okay. Then,
Or I start thinking about the laundry that's in the dryer. It's wet.
no,
It's gonna get moldy. I gotta dry it.
no.
You know, I mean, so it's either that, or that's why I think I'm so attracted to praise and worship or song, is because it's a form of prayer, but it involves my voice. It involves concentration on the lyrics, active praise. But it certainly is a different form of prayer. Different things for different people. Listen, this podcast isn't supposed to be a spiritual direction session, but I did want to point out that, prayer, learning to pray and prayer, I think a lot of guys view it as, listen, I don't just want to sit in a church and just, maybe it's in front of the Holy Eucharist and adoration, but just say, I'm just going to think about God and think about how I can be a better guy, and Jesus, speak to my soul, and I'm just going to sit. I just think it's almost like white knuckling it. That's not going to work. I'm just being honest. That's not going to work for a lot of guys. Thoughts, Formator, Father Shane Deman?
Yeah, I don't think you really described the life of prayer very well there.
The good. Let me have it.
Okay. Authentic prayer is actually dwelling in the intimacy of the divine Trinity. Everybody is ordered towards that in eternal life, in which we're going to be filled entirely with the divine life of the Trinity. So if we don't build the skills now to have a foretaste of that, prayer should not be self-centered. Prayer is not just kind of, what is my to-do list for the day and how do I make myself better? Prayer is ultimately ordered towards taking us into divine life. And that actually fulfills us more than anything on earth can.
Okay, so how does a 39-year-old with 4 kids and a busy schedule do that?
Yeah, I think there's small ways. Can you set aside 5-10 minutes early in the morning or late at night? And I know you've said, well, after the rat race is ended by the end of the day and the children are tucked in by 8:30, I have no energy left. I have found parents who get up before their children are awake and running around the house and terrorizing everybody, those early morning quiet hours, just to take the Latin Magnificat book that you've referenced here and to read a paragraph, a scripture passage or something like that, and to actually just meditate for 5 to 10 minutes a day. If everyone would just do that and recollect themselves in the presence of God, I think they're going to start finding a lot of traction in their own life of virtue and their detection of where God is moving in their heart.
Right, but recognize it's reading something. It's reading a passage. It's reflecting.
Prompting.
And that's the point. That's the point I want to make, though. I think there is a misconception by a number of, I'm going to say young men, just because I don't know if women share it or not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a man, that think that prayer is like almost like monkhood, where you got to be contemplative and just be, Thomas Merton type thing, And I think that, notice the advice you gave was to take a passage, chew it, think about it, 10 minutes, maybe you got a cup of coffee with you, but it's in silence before everybody gets up, and that's enough. I mean, maybe it develops more than that, but the point is there's a stimulus there.
Yeah, there's a stimulus there. That we would use a stimulus for any form of Lectio Divina, especially meditating with Scripture. But the point is not just chewing on it. The prayer is not just your own intellectual activity. Prayer is actually dwelling in communion with the other and listening to the other. Prayer is much more akin to you sitting with Liz by the lakeside and actually watching the sunset over East Lake Okoboji than it is just you chewing on something and thinking about something, right?
Yeah, but you're always thinking about something.
Yeah, you don't shut off the mind, but you're delighting in the presence of the other. We'll have to do another episode on this at another time.
All right, but yeah, okay. And then the delight ends in 2 minutes. And then what?
Then you're always drawn back into love once again. So you have 2 minutes of great intimacy with Liz, but you're not like, I'll never see her again. No, the heart longs for more. That's what communion and an authentic relationship does.
Well, we'll need to work on that, because after 2 minutes of the sunset, I'm going to slap my knees and be like, well, time to go inside.
All right, then we're going to work on your ability just to sit in beauty, in peace. Okay.
Yeah. Good luck.
Okay.
Even when I'm skiing, I got to see the mountains. Last thing I want to touch with you, and then we're done. By the way, what time do you have to go?
Soon.
All
Soon.
right. He's giving me, by the way, he's giving me looks right now.
Yeah.
Like, are we almost wrapping this up? Yeah, let's go. This is much more verbose than last time. Listen, we can edit, okay?
Okay.
Just calm down here. Hey, Father Shane, just be present in the Trinity with me,
Okay.
okay?
I'm present.
Yeah, so just be, empty yourself. Okay. Last thing, Catholic passage. I think it's needed now more than perhaps ever because of, and in places like the Diocese of Sioux City. And let me explain that. I shot an email back to somebody from the diocesan newspaper yesterday who asked about Catholic passage. Her name's Renee Webb. Do you know her?
Uh-huh.
All
Yeah, she
right.
works with the
So
Lumen.
yeah, she wanted I don't know, a quote or something. So here's what I said. I said, given the nature of our rural diocese and population disbursement, Catholic passage is all the more important for the laity to take an active role in their faith formation. The reality is the modern day priest to parishioner ratio cannot sustain programming like it did 30 or 40 years ago. There simply isn't enough time with all of the parish responsibilities and the geographic distancing. Catholic passage is a way for the faithful young adults to express and nurture their own faith, and in so doing, pass the deposit of faith to the next generation of Catholics. Do you have any parting thoughts on why the laity, why program, whether it's Catholic passage or anything else, but why young adults taking ownership of their own faith life within a parish, being accountable to each other, and doing so outside the structure of it all being priest-led, or the priest has to do everything. I mean, I think that's a more unique and acute issue in Northwest Iowa and in the Diocese of Sioux City, given some of the vocation, not problems, but just the lack of numbers, frankly, comparative to the geographic swath we have in Northwest Iowa. Do you see any interaction or interplay between young adults getting engaged in programming like this, given that nuance?
Oh, sure. I mean, the whole topic of this podcast today is securing your own oxygen mask before assisting others. So you're inviting young adults to actually, and young families, to get involved in taking an active role in their own faith. What is that doing? It's just securing their own oxygen mask so they can pass the torch to the next generation. The Second Vatican Council called for a much more active and robust role of the laity. And the church's vision is that priests and nuns are not supposed to go out and change the world. We don't have the time and the energy, nor the numbers, or the access, okay? But attorneys, teachers, nurses, business owners, merchants, flight attendants, everybody who's out working in the world, they actually have the ability to take the light of Christ and shine out on others, which priests and religious just simply don't have access to or the time. So I think this is a great initiative. And anyone who wants to take their faith seriously and say, I'm going to secure my own oxygen mask and work towards bettering my own faith and deepening my own relationship with Jesus, will inevitably start bearing fruit for others. And that's what the world needs to see. That's what the church's vision is for the transformation of culture.
Very good. Father, as always, thank you for confronting, engaging, challenging me, challenging the listeners. I think it's been a good conversation. I know you got to get going. Before you go, any shout outs you want to give?
Let's definitely do a shout out to your wonderful wife, Liz. How she puts it up with it all. She's a saint.
She's a walking saint.
Canonization document should begin shortly.
Yeah. Well, Father Hughes would agree with you. He reminds me every week that I see him. He goes, I don't know how you did it. God bless your wife.
Yeah.
So I definitely married up. She is a saint. So thank you, Father Shane. I appreciate your time. And
good to be with you, Johnny.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Catholic Passage Podcast, and we hope that it blesses you. Please check our show notes for a reflection takeaway, as well as more info on Catholic Passage. We aim to support parents and educators as they pass on the Catholic faith and way of life to their children and students. To find out more about what we offer, or how you might collaborate with us, visit CatholicPassage.com. Most importantly, you can support us through your prayers. We'll be praying for you, and please pray for us.